Welcome back, guys. I'm going to show you a little bit about what we can actually do in Fusion. So having shown you a little bit about the orientation of things, hopefully you understand a few basic concepts. I mentioned in my previous video that you can look at this view as if we're looking at it from the right isometric view, that is the top, front, and right-hand side. Well, my advice to you is a couple of things here. Firstly, make use of this center point. Okay, it's really useful to reference from that point in the future. I would also encourage you to think about drawing things in whatever the orientation is that they would sit in real life. So if you can imagine a drink bottle sitting on a table, you would maybe start with the base of the drink bottle, extrude that up, and then go and do some additional features or something of that sort of nature. That might not be the greatest example, but it's a good rule for working through things. Okay. All right. So to start with, guys, we're going to come to this icon here, which is Create Sketch. All right. Now it prompts us to select which work plane we want to work in. Either way you go, in this case, I think it probably makes most sense to use the XY work plane, which is the horizontal flat work plane, as if you've got a desk in front of you that you're working on. Okay, so I'm going to go and click on that one. Notice my view cube now spins around, so we are looking at this work plane from the top. Okay, now I'm just going to select the rectangle tool, and I'm going to select the first corner in the center of my universe. I've clicked my mouse and I'm just going to move my mouse away. Okay, so I can still move away. Now notice those little text boxes there with the numbers in them. We can do things in a couple of different ways here. So if I want a 50mm by 50mm square, I can shrink these down and try to get really precise, okay, and get them to 50mm and click. That's going to be pretty tricky to do. Or I can click and press escape to turn my rectangle tool off. I can then use my dimension tool to click my line and dimension that to 50mm. I'm just typing that in and pressing enter. Alternatively, I can click two parallel lines side by side and dimension this side as 50mm and press enter. I'm going to turn that dimension tool off by hitting escape. Okay. Alternatively, guys, if I zoom in here, remember I'm zooming in with the roller on my mouse. Alternatively, I can do something like this. I want to draw a square in the center of that. Now in this particular case, I'm going to say that I want my square to be 30mm by 30mm. So I have just typed 30 on my keyboard, and then I'm going to press tab, and notice that it tabs over to my other text box, dialog box, measurement box, whatever you want to call it, and I'm going to press enter. Okay. Now there are some ways that we can constrain different lines and objects, but for the time being, I'm just going to encourage you to use the dimension tool, just like I've showed you, and I'm going to dimension that to 10mm. You'll notice, if you know your basic maths, that this side will also be 10mm. If I try to dimension this here, it will tell me that there is a bit of a problem with that. Okay, so let's see what it says. When a text box like this, a dialog box opens up, guys, you need to make sure you read what it says and don't just hit OK or cancel. So it says, adding this dimension will over-constrain the sketch. Choose OK to create a driven dimension. Now what a driven dimension is an overriding dimension that ignores the constraints. I'm going to click cancel, okay? And it comes up here saying that the sketch geometry is over-constrained. Notice that because I clicked cancel, that dimension did not show. Now, I want to talk about this notion of constraints. So a constraint is something that keeps you within the bounds of something. All of these dimensions that we've put in here are constraints. We are telling it that this outer square has to be 50mm. if we go and say that this line here has to be different to 50 millimeters, we are contradicting what we have said up here. Okay, so that would be a problem. That would be overly constraining our sketch. So just like here, we said 10 millimeters, 50 minus 10, okay, minus 30 equals 10 here. If I go to put a dimension in here, the computer thinks that I'm telling it that it needs to be something different from 10 millimeters, which it has a problem with because it will contradict what we've told it up here. Okay, hope that makes sense. Not going to labor on that for too much longer. I'm going to do the same here and make that 10 millimeters like that. Okay, so now that we've got our sketch the way that we want it, I am going to finish the sketch. That's really important, guys, that you finish the sketch. I'm going to show you another way of doing that in just a sec. So we've now finished our sketch and we have our profile. Okay, this is a shape. It is a two-dimensional shape. If I click the home button, we'll see our two-dimensional shape exist in isometric. In this particular case, guys, we have two squares, but they are forming two profiles. So we have an outside profile here, like a donut, if you like, and we have an internal profile here as well. When we're going to go and extrude, because we've got two profiles, it asks us to select which profile we want to work with. So I could select that inside profile, or I could select the outside profile. In this particular case, it doesn't really make sense for us to select the inside, so I'm going to select the outside. And we can do this in a couple of different ways. We can type in that we want to extrude it 10 millimeters, or we can click and drag the arrow. Quite often I will click and drag the arrow so that I can tell it which direction I want to move it in. Now in this particular case, I'm going to change it to 50 millimeters so that we've got like that cube shape. What am I drawing? Nothing in particular, I'm just showing you stuff. A couple of things before we click OK. We have the direction that we're moving in. We have the distance of 50 millimeters that we've moved it to. We have a taper angle of 0. I could, if we like, put a 10-degree taper on and see what happens. Or we can put a negative 10-degree taper on and see what happens. That wouldn't work particularly well because our shape isn't big enough. And the last thing that's important for you to know is that we're saying it's a new body. That is not super important right in the moment, but it will become more important later on. Click OK. We now have an object. So now, if you recall back to the introductory video, I mentioned a couple of things like the browser over here. We've now got a thing that says bodies, and we've got body 1. This object is body 1. We've also got our folder of sketches. That sketch 1 is our original sketch of the 50 millimeter square with our 30 millimeter square inside it. We can go back and edit that sketch by right-clicking Edit Sketch, and I might decide to change this to 20 millimeters. Okay, and when I finish the sketch, notice that the three-dimensional form, the extrusion, the object, has now updated to change as well. Okay. Also notice down here in the timeline, we've now got the sketch that we drew and the extrusion. And those things are happening in the time, in the order of which we've done things. Okay. If we now want to go and create another hole in that object or another chunk coming out from the object, I can go and click on this surface, right click, create sketch. I can now go and do something of this nature. I'm not going to do anything too specific. I'm going to turn my tool off. Normally finish sketch comes up there. I often use the right click option when I'm working. Going to extrude. This time I'm going to select this profile. Rather than adding material, I'm going to remove material like that. I can remove more. That's a bigger number. We only need to remove it 50, but I can remove it more than 50. It really doesn't matter. Notice that now the operation is cutting, not adding material. Okay. All right. The last little helpful tip here is a new body referencing from our old body. Okay, so you might have noticed that I had a bit of an obscure size attached to that. There was nothing in particular about it. I'm going to right click, create a new sketch here. I'm going to need to think about what I'm going to do here. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to draw that, fitting in nicely into that hole. I'm going to finish the sketch and I'm going to extrude back this way. Now, if I'm lucky, yep, it's going to tell me that I can do it to 10 millimeters, which is in line with that little cutout. Okay. Now this time, guys, notice that it says join. If I press join, that little chunk that I've joined in there, it will become part of my original form. I don't want to join it. I want to go new body. And notice that the lines come in to indicate that there's actually two different objects that are existing there. And then when I come over to my bodies over here, I've now got body 1 and body 2. Body 2 is this object, body 1 is this object. Okay. Now this is really, really helpful and important. If I go onto this surface now and create sketch, I can do something along these lines. Because I've used that center point, I can click on that center point. I can come up to 12.713 millimeters, which is a very obscure size, but it's connecting in with my object that I've done the sketch to. And I can come across 50 millimeters, which I'm going to have to type in. When I go to extrude that, I now have 3 profiles. I have 1 profile there, 1 profile there, and 1 profile there. I want to extrude all of those 15 millimeters, and I'm going to join it, and it is going to join to the body that I've drawn the sketch from. So now, oh, something has gone awry there. It has actually joined it all to my original, which I didn't want. So notice that I can go back in time on my timeline. I can delete that extrusion if I want. Okay, and I can start again. So I'm going to delete that extrusion and go back to my sketch. Okay, and that will enable me to work differently. I'm going to leave that with you, and I will show you some additional features in some additional videos.